Hi, I'm Ari, I'm the Oak Witch, and in today's video I'm going to be going over some seals and symbols in English folk magic. Symbolism is something which exists inherently within the world of esoterica and the occult, and for hundreds of years now so many people have attempted to explain and understand the universe, divinity and spirit through symbolism. So symbols can act as metaphors for our understanding of these occult concepts, but symbols and signs can also act as tools for our magic. And that is what I'm going to go over today. I'm going to give a few symbols or seals that have existed in English folk magic practices and explain why they're used and how you can use them in your modern practice. These symbols may not have English origins per se, but if we look at Britain as a whole, or specifically England, it has a rich history of people migrating through from different lands. And if we're looking at modern English folk magic, we're going to be looking at the records of practices from the Cunning folk and what they used. And what they used was what was around them. They used just what worked. Something also to consider is that Cunning folk were not the only folk magical practitioners of Britain or specifically England. But if we look at the Cunning folk, we can see that these were people who, one, were Christian, which is something which people tend to forget. So they employed a lot of Christian theology and things like the Psalms in their practice. And they also employed the use of grimoires. But that's a massive tangent, and I'll maybe do a video about grimoires and how they appear in English folk magic. Today's video I'm going to be going over some symbols, some amulets, some charms that were employed by the Cunning folk and other practitioners in English folk magic. The first symbol I'm going to talk about comes from Devon, and it is a protection amulet. It looks like this. So I've seen this pop up in a lot of modern books about English folk magic. I've seen this pop up in the Cunning Man's Handbook, I've seen this pop up in The Wicked Shall Decay, and I'm pretty sure it was in this book as well, which is a new release by George Hares, Barbarous Words. These are all three very excellent books, by the way. It initially comes from a book by Sarah Hewett, and that book basically goes over the folklore and folk magic of Devon. So this symbol is said to protect against your enemies and ward off the evil eye. So it is said to be made out of pure cast iron, to be engraved on a full moon and fumigated with the spirits of Mars. And this referred to a mixture of red saunders, frankincense and red peppers. So of course, this is the record we have. And for modern practice, I would say that it's unlikely the everyday practitioner will be able to model this amulet from pure cast iron. Just is a bit inaccessible. So I would say we can adapt. You can still employ the functionality perhaps by writing it in an iron coloured pen, or just, in pencil, or drawing it on some grey or iron material, coloured material. This can act as a nice substitution if you still wanted to follow in that same line, but it's of my personal belief you could still use the function of the symbol in a modern day context to just ward against the evil eye and protect against enemies. So some ideas for modern practice can include just utilising it like a sigil, like you would any sigil. You can write it on your charm bags, on your poppets. Some people like to sew their sigils in like the lining of their clothes, and that is obviously a way you can use this. It is a guarding symbol. A lot of people employ candles in their protection magic, and obviously you can inscribe this on your candle, or if you have one of those 7-day candles, you can obviously just draw it on the glass. Many ways you can get creative using this symbol and imply it for that modern sort of eclectic witchcraft. And to be fair, all of the things I'm discussing obviously will be symbols, so you can adopt these ideas for pretty much all of these symbols I'm going to discuss. So just saying that so I don't repeat myself every time. But yeah, obviously you can sort of employ these symbols in similar contexts. Now the next thing I'm going to talk about is the daisy wheel. Now this is slightly different to the other symbols because it wasn't necessarily used in the same way. So this daisy wheel is actually sort of this idea of medieval graffiti, and it was drawn onto walls, onto different buildings such as churches, drawn into hearths, above doorways, on thresholds, on so many different things, but it was drawn specifically with a compass. or I should say engraved, using a compass. It's also called the hexafoil, and I think the New Age community has adopted it, calling it the flower of life. Now this is a symbol that Brian Hoggard has spoken about in his book Magical House Protection, and he discusses how this was initially a solar symbol from the Mediterranean. He describes that as a symbol, the daisy wheel shines a light into dark places and makes it difficult for the dark to lurk near there. So you can see how obviously this would have acted as a warding off evil, any dark forces, any sort of negative energy or unwanted energy, and hence why it was inscribed onto buildings, onto houses, to protect the house, to protect that area. Every time I've tried to use this symbol, it's so hard to draw without a compass. It is actually like quite hard to draw, at least I struggle. So I would suggest, yes, use a compass, but this is a protection symbol and you can utilise as such. So in the ways I described before, like a sigil, you can use this in many different aspects of modern witchcraft practice. Engraving it onto candles might be slightly difficult, but you can give it a go. What I tend to think is a better use of this symbol for modern practice is to just draw it like using pencil with a compass on a piece of paper, make it like square piece of paper and then put that like above a doorway. Because obviously I feel like a lot of people nowadays can't engrave walls, especially if you don't own the place, if you're renting, you just don't want to damage your house or your apartment. That's a little bit inaccessible for a lot of people, so I wouldn't necessarily go straight to carving your walls if you're not able to do so. But you can place a piece of paper using this symbol. You can place that above a doorway, you can place that in your hearth. Many sort of those liminal thresholds works perfectly well. The next symbol I'm going to talk about is pretty much similar to this last one, and it is the pentagram. So obviously we sort of know what the pentagram is, and this isn't something which is specifically tied to English folk magic, but it was employed in a similar manner to the daisy wheel as medieval graffiti, where pentagrams have been found carved onto places like churches. And to be fair, you see a lot of pentagrams utilised in the architecture of these amazing cathedrals and these churches. So this symbol has existed for a long, long time, way before the modern sort of pagan pentacle that people tend to use now. And it's actually interesting considering that the pentacle, as we sort of know it as a pentagram inside a circle, that is not the original definition of a pentacle. A pentacle is simply just talisman or amulet used in magic, and we can actually see like the earliest examples of pentacles from the Key of Solomon. I think it was actually Gerald Gardner who sort of took the pentagram in a circle and used that as the term for pentacle, and then that just sort of caught on and now everyone uses that. I think that's the origination of how that came to be. But in any case, this is not necessarily about the pentacle, we're talking about the pentagram. And honestly, the pentagram is just a 5-pointed star polygon. And it's interesting, again, Brian Hoggard in this book talks about the utilisation of the pentagram as a sort of approach-opaque protection symbol carved onto churches and buildings, like I said before. And he theorises the symbolism is more tied to the Christian theology. And if you're thinking about magic in that time period and the Cunning folk, who obviously, you know, were Christians or probably considered themselves Christians, it kind of makes sense. The Christian symbology of the pentagram notes that the 5 stars are the 5 wounds of Christ. And as I touched on before in the grimoires, I think specifically the Key of Solomon as well, we have this idea of the pentagram being a good protection against demons. So it would make sense that this symbol was employed in a similar medieval graffiti to the daisy wheel to protect oneself. And the idea of protection has made its way into modern witchcraft practice. Obviously the pentagram is something which is just employed everywhere. I feel like this is a bit of a cop-out symbols to give, but I wanted to give it and talk about it in a slightly different context to, as people know it from like the sort of neo-pagan pentacle. And yeah, there's so many ways you can utilise the pentagram. I feel like I don't really need to give many options. As I've said before, you can utilise the symbol in much of your spell work. Ways that I have used the pentagram in my modern spell work and modern practice when charming objects, animistic spirit work practices aside in terms of charming things, I've also employed the sort of visualisation Pentagram method, which I think I saw Devon Hunter spoke about it in this book, which is quite a lovely book actually. And yeah, anyway, so it's that visualization of like the blue flame pentagram and that focus, that energy work, and pushing that into your object to charm it. I've done it in sort of my daily rituals, so many different ways you can utilize the pentagram. Carving it onto candles is a really good idea. Using the symbol of the pentagram in your sigils, like making your sigils, it's another great idea. So many ways you can use it. And the fourth symbol I'm going to talk about, which is actually more of a seal, is the Fear No Foe seal. Now, the name Fear No Foe I got from Gemma. I don't think it's actually called that, but that's the name that she has adopted. And it's interesting because many modern practitioners grab this seal and the next one, which I'll discuss afterwards, from The Discovery of Witchcraft by Reginald Scott. And he called this seal and the next one the Seals of the Earth. Now, I actually read an interesting article or blog post discussing where Reginald Scott got these from, and I'll have that linked below, but I won't go too much into detail because again I could just go on so many tangents. But this symbol, the Fear No Foe seal, essentially was written in The Discovery of Witchcraft alongside the phrase, "Whoever bears this figure about him, let him fear no foe but fear God." In short, whoever wears or bears this symbol can fear no foe. So you can interpret this as an idea of a symbol of courage, of confidence, and to ward against your enemies, your foes, anyone who is set to sort of do you harm and not have your best interests in mind. So you can see this idea of wearing this seal in perhaps appropriate ways. To be fair, from this I would see it more as like a courage or confidence symbol, and would employ it as such. To bear the symbol, if you didn't want to actually like draw it on yourself, you can employ it as like a sigil. So, you know, if you put your sigils in your phone case or in your pockets, you can put the seal on the poppet, on your charm bag. There's so many ways you can go over it. But I guess I would employ it more as something which you're bearing, you're keeping on your person. Following on from this, we get to the next one, which I want to talk about is Master All Spirits seal. Again, this is a name coined by Gemma, at least, you know, to my knowledge. She came up with these names, at least that's what you can see on the Troy Books Redbubble site. When I was looking at their website, I noticed they had some like actual sort of talisman amulet sort of like pendants that you can get, and they actually look really nice and I really want one. But anyway, that's a way you can employ it in your modern practice, by the way. If you want to spend some money, you can obviously buy it from there. That's not sponsored or anything. I just saw them and I saw that she used those names. So I thought I would give credit where credit's due. But again, this is a seal or seal of the earth, as Reginald Scott says, where he describes who forbeareth this figure about him, all spirits shall do him homage. It essentially means whoever bears the symbol can control all spirits. This is more direct spirit work practice. Now, what I will say is that if you're a beginner and don't really know much about spirit work or just anything really about like the basics of sort of cleansing, banishing, protection, the sort of basics that we like to give in modern witchcraft practice, which I think is slightly more nuanced anyway. But I do think obviously it's good to sort of have a sense of grounding in knowledge before you sort of jump immediately into specifically like controlling spirits and invocation and evocation. I think you need some form of like basis in knowledge and experience in other things before you get to those more like tricky things. This is for safety reasons. This is not to like gatekeep. It's just to sort of make sure you're going the safest route into these more challenging aspects of the craft and of the occult. I wanted to sort of just give that disclaimer before I sort of like jump into talking about this seal, because obviously it is specifically controlling spirits, and with that needs a little bit more experience in sort of my opinion. It's interesting actually, in this book, which is Barbarous Words, A Compendium of Conjurations, British Folk Magic and Other Popist Charms by George Hares, I followed this guy on Instagram, I noticed that he had a book coming out, and obviously love me some British folk magic, so I thought, hell yeah, bought the book. And it's a self-published, so I love like buying those sorts of books as well. And I think he's done a really good job of this, definitely. I really do like this book. But I bring this up because he actually records a story in this book where he utilizes this charm. He adapted the symbol to fit this modern situation that he was dealing with. I won't spoil the story because I do want people to sort of support him and buy it, but many different ways you can utilize this symbol. As it specifically relates to spirit work, you can obviously draw it on your body if you are performing larger spirit work. You can also draw it on like a base of your working and have your working on top of it. But yeah, this one's a bit more for the experienced witches out there. You can certainly use this symbol for a lot of different ways in modern practice. And the last symbol I'm going to talk about is the SATOR Square. So this is actually more of a protection charm, and it is comprised of 5 palindrome Latin words. The function of this is to ward away illness and drive away evil spirits. There's actually been numerous uses of this symbol recorded, but it's largely sort of used in a protection context, I would say. So what makes this charm quite cool, utilizing the idea of palindrome words, the words actually sort of reflect each other. So we have Sator and Rotas, we have Tenet in the middle, and we have the opera and arepo. Now the meaning of these words has been largely debated. The one that I found written on the Museum of Witchcraft and Magic website is: the creator to whom I appeal for help controls all of our endeavours and the changes of fortune that befall us. So this charm has come up in a lot of different places, but it's quite present in Britain, and it was said to be written on parchment, enclosed in a bag and hung around the neck. For modern practice, of course, you can still just do that. You can write it on charm bags, place your charm bag, if not around your neck, just on your person, in your pockets, in your bag. If you carry it around, you can engrave these words all across your candle. You can place the square like below your candle plate and put the candle on top. So many different ways you can get really creative with using a symbol like this to work alongside the goal and function of your existing spell. It can act as kind of like a layer of ingredient and be really effective. Something to note is that there's so many different squares used by the Cunning folk, especially if you're getting into like planetary squares as well, magical number squares. There are very many, and I could do a video on those if you guys so wish. If you want to, let me know below. But yeah, I think that's all from me for now. I hope you enjoyed these symbols and seals. I think that symbolism is something which has always really interested me. One of my first books as a young sort of teen pagan and witch was this book, which I don't think actually is sold anymore, but I've always loved the study of symbolism and occult symbols and what they meant and how they were used. I've always loved it, and I think as well for visual people who are visual learners or really connect with symbology in that sense to help drive a goal through, can really utilize these symbols well. I think for me, working with symbols really enriches my practice. That's why so many of us use sigils, because sigils are different, I guess, in that it's your own personal creation and that's part of the magical process, but they also visually embody your goal, your intention and what you're trying to achieve. And that's something which is quite powerful. A lot of people really connect with in terms of as a tool for magic. So yeah, I thought I'd give some that have existed in English folk magic. And yeah, if you guys wanted to see a bit more of the resources where I sort of found this information from and where you can go find the information yourself, I have a references section in the video description, so you can go see them there. Thank you so much for watching, I really appreciate it, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!